From the company, the most important person is called the safety director. They're not going to want to tell you who this person is. The safety director is in charge of making sure all drivers for that company on the road in these big rigs and these commercial trucks are in full compliance with the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. The safety director has this responsibility. There is a program somewhere in that company. There's a training manual, there's training videos, and the safety director has responsibility. So you want all the safety documents for sure. You want the personnel file for sure of the driver. You want what testing or qualifications they put the driver through. You want the commercial driving license, the record. But most importantly, these days there's a new rule under the Federal Motor Rules that says the company can inquire and should inquire as to the former employer of this driver right here. This driver that was in this catastrophic accident here, the employer should have inquired of this driver's previous employer. And if they don't, then I think it's the J.D. Hunt case. If they don't, then they're going to be responsible and liable for not checking into this driver's qualifications. That puts a lot of heat and pressure, not only on the driver, but the driver's former employer. Because if the former employer is contacted, they've got to give you the full documents. So sometimes in the old days, these drivers used to go from employer 1 to employer 2, employer 3, and 4, and so on. They didn't tell the next employer what they did wrong with employer number 1 or their predecessor employer. Now they have to. But additionally, the employer, the new carrier, has to check into this driver's background, has to check with the previous carrier. Sometimes liability can be imposed on the current carrier company, the current driver, and the former company. That's important for insurance purposes, especially when somebody's been killed, several people have been killed, and there's catastrophic injuries.
Now let's talk a little bit about insurance coverage. What are the requirements on a commercial vehicle for insurance coverage?
With regard to insurance on commercial vehicles, it's different than cars. You need to understand that we're just coming out of this whole situation whereby if you had an accident with a big truck, a big rig, somebody owned the tractor, somebody different owned the trailer. When you try to track it down, you find out that the driver driving the tractor is owned by a company in Georgia, but it's leased and further owned or co-owned by a company in the islands like Grand Cayman. It's very difficult and was very difficult to track it down. The trailer is leased out of by a company in Texas, for example, and owned by a company in Louisiana, and you can't find them. So insurance coverages was very difficult, and it was difficult to impose liability on the insurance company. Now, there is an endorsement called an MCS 90 endorsement. What does that mean? That means basically in most situations it doesn't matter who owned the tractor. It doesn't matter if this island company, Grand Cayman or Bermuda, leased the tractor. It doesn't matter who owns the trailer. The MCS 90 endorsement says to the consumer, to the individual, to the family that's been devastated, you're going to have insurance coverage and you don't have to search for it. It's going to be right there, and the endorsement covers it all no matter who owned or leased the tractor trailer. It doesn't apply in every situation, but it applies in most situations.
And who's responsible to make sure that they're in compliance with all these rules and regulations?
Well, the driver's responsible, but most importantly, the company is. And that's why you always want to know who the safety director is. We ask companies all the time, who was the safety director involved in this truck-car collision? No answer. Silence. Excuse me, I didn't hear you. Who was the safety director involved for your company that trained, qualified, background checked, drug and alcohol tested this driver for compliance with all the federal motor rules that we've been talking about? And the safety director is the person at the company that's responsible, which makes the company responsible. And there may be more insurance policies other than just under the MCS 90 endorsement.
What about, is it considering the medical history of a particular driver, is it important to request his prior medical records?
Absolutely it is. They lie. They don't tell the truth. They lie about their blood pressure. They lie about their health. They lie about heart disease, lung disease, sleep apnea, fatigue, drugs, depression. I mean, you can't have certain medical conditions in a driver when they're driving a big rig on the road, when they're busting the times, busting the rules and regulations, driving for hours on end, fatigued, falling asleep, coming down a mountain road or any other road heading right in your direction with a complete disaster impending. It's illegal, it's improper, and we stop it.
Now, with regard to these drivers, obviously we're not trying to allege that every driver out there doesn't comply with these rules, but it seems to be that a great percentage of them do not comply with every rule and regulation.
A great percentage of them don't. There are some good drivers out there. There's some good companies out there. However, what happens in the accidents, and most of them, is that the rules have been violated in one way or another. In other words, you got a cargo shift. You didn't have a pre-inspection of the trip. You didn't have reflective tape. You didn't have an inspection of the brakes. You didn't have a stop periodically on the trip itself to check the brakes, the cargo load, the shift, the ties, the binds, and how the load is secured. The logs are changed. The reason that we know this is that's what usually happens and causes these accidents, these tremendous catastrophic accidents. So you don't hear about the other ones because they're probably complying. You hear about the ones that fell asleep, the ones that were taking pills, the ones that were cutting corners on their logs. That's what you're hearing about. That's what's got to be stopped, and that's what we do at our firm.
Now, is it possible for an average person to pursue this type of claim against a commercial truck driver and a commercial company?
It's possible, but highly unlikely. If you've just listened to all we said about the federal motor rules, there's literally hundreds of them. There's all kinds of ways they can dodge these responsibilities. So I would recommend anybody, any family, any person involved or affected by a truck car crash with a catastrophic injury, serious injuries, you need to hire an attorney, and you better find one that knows the rules and regulations and the ins and outs.